Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of DevDrawer. Today we're going to be going over routing in Laravel. Last week we went over how to install Laravel, how to set it up with Bootstrap, and how to set up the authentication screens. So we're going to first not use the authentication part yet. We're actually going to be working in the public view, so that I can kind of show you a little bit about how to build out your routes the correct way and how to name them, how to pass variables and stuff like that. So this should be a pretty quick tutorial. Routing's not too difficult in Laravel, but it is something that's very important to know, and there's a lot of things that you can do with it. So I'll try to go over as many as I possibly can. But before I get started, if you like these kind of videos, hit that subscribe button with the bell notification, and you should be able to get these kind of videos once a week. I try to push them out every Monday at 11 o'clock or 11:15 Central Standard Time. So just put a notification on there so you can get to see them in the future. But for right now, let's go ahead and get started. So let's I'm cleaning up the screen a little bit to remove everything except for our web.php, just because this is where all of our routes are, and we kind of started it a little bit whenever we were working with the administration side. We created this public view as well as the test view that returns this authentication middleware, which prevents you from being able to see this page unless you're logged into the system. With this public view that we have here is going to be under resources, and we have our admin versus our public. And this right here doesn't have any kind of middleware authentication or anything on it, so you can let me log out over here and you can see it as just a regular page. So what we can do to this page is let's try a few things. So one thing, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to remove the view. So if we go to /about, it's going to display nothing. So inside of this function, we can make it where it says echo test, and then it'll actually echo out that code with no view around it. Or we could pass a variable. So instead of saying echo test, let's say echo var, and then we're going to pass a var to this by doing a /var like this. So now if we we go to /about, it's not going to be found because that page, we technically removed it outside of it having something afterwards. So if we do /test, I think I need to remove this. So yeah, I think that just don't need to have $sign there. So yeah, so we have the test here. So if we go to about /test, it'll show the test page. So let me go ahead and I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it so we can have multiple versions of this. So let's undo this and get rid of this and just have the About Us page actually returning that view. So if we go back to our About Us page, it'll return the view, and let's not have this a named route because we don't want that to be a named route. So we still have our About Us page, and then if we go to /test or whatever we put in here, it'll print out that test word. So test, dev drawer, anything we put in there, we can create it where it prints out that word. Now the difference between these two are, number one, this one is a named route. This named route is important because inside of your layouts, so I'm going to open up our app.blade, and inside of our layouts we have this route about us. If we wanted to change the URL, instead of having to come in and change it every single time we use this URL inside of our HTML code, what we do is we come over here and we can change this to about-us, and because it's still using that named route about-us or about or whatever we had it initially, and it's being called here regardless of what page we have it pointing to. So let's say if we go back to just our home page, now if we click on this, you'll see that the URL now reflects about us, and it's just because this named route is what is pointing to this link rather than the link itself. So we can go in here and change this to anything that we want. So let's say if we wanted to make this a test page, we could do a refresh on our home page. That's because I already have a test page. Let's do dev drawer. Alright, so now if we refresh the page and we click on this, it'll bring us to dev drawer. We didn't have to change the HTML for this navigation. we just change it in here, which makes it very convenient whenever you have a whole bunch of like forms that are going to a specific controller or something like that. You don't have to change where that form is posting to. You just come in here and change the name route, and then it updates it everywhere throughout the site. So let's go back and put this back at about, and then let's go back to our home page and click on it. So now we're back at the About Us page, and our other one still works. So if we do About Us/test, we can see that this page is still here. So what happens if I want to make it where this variable, we can push variables to this About Blade template? So let's take, and I'm going to, let's say we're going to return the view, and then after the view we're going to do comma, and then we're going to open up an array, and then inside of this array we're just going to create a variable called variable, and then we're going to make that variable equal the var that's being passed. So now if we refresh this page, it brings us to the public About Blade template, and then inside of this template we can now control variables from it. So you do 2 squiggly brackets, and then we're just going to do the var, the variable that we created, and if we refresh it over here, you can see that now it has a test. And if we go back to the other page, you can see that that variable doesn't exist over here. So we're going to have to do some PHP to make it where this, either this variable is found or it's not found, or we can come over here and combine these 2 routes to make it where it kind of does the same thing. If the variable is existing, return this view. If it doesn't, then return this view without the variable on it. The easiest way would be to handle it inside of your Blade template, and if we remove this, obviously it's going to work, but we might want to have that variable there, so we're going to have to surround it with an if statement. There's a few ways to run code inside of this, so let's try it the PHP way. So we can do the regular way that you would know PHP, so we can do something like if is set var, and then we can display, I didn't do the if, so let's do PHP if is set var, and then we just echo out that var, and then we just do an end if. So like this, and let me clean this up a little bit so it's all on one line so y'all can see it better. So this will be the PHP way to do it. So if we refresh this page, it doesn't show any errors, but if we come over here and we do test, it shows that part of the code. But you can also use Blade templating, which is very similar to this. Essentially it is, instead of using the PHP, we can do @isSet, check for the var, and then over here we can do @end_is_set, and then that'll essentially do the exact same thing that we just did with PHP. So if we refresh the page, that all works. If we remove that variable, it still works. So there's a few different ways that you can do it, and then I'm sure there's also some more ways to do it. So you could do something with inside of the brackets. So let's take this away and come up here, and then we're going to do var. We can do 2 questions, and if it doesn't exist, we can just print out a blank statement. So if we come back over here and refresh, that still works, and we go here, that still works. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can control your Blade templating. I would recommend using the Blade templating rather than having hard-coded PHP inside of your code. If you're not too familiar with the squiggly brackets part of it, like this is obviously very simple. So it either displays the variable or it doesn't. I would stick to this other way that I did with the isSet and then the end isSet if you're not too familiar with how to do it inside of your squiggly brackets. But that's essentially how you could pass a variable to this page. But what happens if you want to pass an array to this page? So let's say instead of doing, let me close this, instead of doing variable equals var, we can actually say that we want to have, let's change this up a little bit. So we're going to, actually, you know what? Let's not do it in here. Let's do it in here, where we're not going to pass a variable inside of the function as part of the URL. We're actually going to just pass something that's hard-coded. So we're going to create that array again, and this time we're going to create a variable called array, and then we're going to pass an array to it. So let's say the first part we want to do is test, and then the next part is going to be dev drawer, and then the next part, let's do final. So what this will do is it will pass that variable array as an array rather than as a single variable like we're doing over here. So it won't work on this page because this page is looking for that specific variable to be passed as part of the URL, whereas this one is not. So if we try to refresh it over here, it's not going to change anything because we're not adding anything to it. But if we come over here, this is where that page is going to be looking for this array. So inside of our Blade template, we can do the same thing that we did here and just change this to array, and then change this to, and this is, it's not going to work because the array is not a string and it's trying to produce it as a string, but you'll be able to see that it's trying to grab that information now. So obviously it's trying to pass it as a string, so we don't want to do that. So maybe we come in here and we do a for each. So we do for each array as single, and then over here we can display that single value, and then over here we can do end for each. And now if we refresh it, we have test, dev drawer, and final. So it works for this page because it's hard coded as part of this route, but if we go back to our test, it's going to break the page because that array is still part of this Blade template. So the only thing we'd have to do is once again add this is set above it, and then close out our is set. So end is set, and then change this to array, and now both pages, both variations of this page will work. So if we go back to our home page or our about page, it says test, dev drawer, final. So that's a way that you can pass these variables to your named and unnamed routes, even using the same page. Now what you have over here is you have what type of route it is. So in this instance, it's a get. Basically, a get is whatever's in the URL, that's what we want to use. You also have the ability to do a post route. I'm trying to remember all the different variations of it. So you have get, post, put, patch, delete options. If you're familiar with API calls, it's kind of the same thing. Get, post, put, and delete would be something you would use inside of an API, and you can create your routes with those in mind. I'm not going to go into the delete and the patch or the put or anything like that right now, but we probably can get into the post as part of this tutorial. But first I want to go into a little bit more detail about how you can pass things to a view or to a route itself. The next part we can go over is how to build it out as part of a controller. As part of our initial setup, you can see here that this is how you would control or be able to use a route with a controller. It's essentially the same thing that you're used to. So what you're going to do is, this is the home controller and it's using the @index function. So if we go to all the way up to the top to app, HTTP controllers, you can see we have a controller named home controller. If we open up this controller, you can see that there is a public function called index. Now what you could either do is use this home controller for all of your public facing pages, or you can create your own controller, something called pages controller or something like that. But for this tutorial, I'm going to use this this controller as the front facing part of our website. So if we come over here and let's say we want to create a new page, and we're going to call it, let me just copy this, and we're going to call this slash contact, and then we're going to do home controller @index, and then in here we're just going to call the function contact, and then we're going to name this route contact as well. So right now we have the new route contact, but you can't actually access it anywhere, so we need to go to our app.blade.php, and we're just going to copy this list item here, and we're going to add another one next to it called contact, and then we're going to make it linked to that contact route. That way if we ever want to change it, we can change it from this one place. Which now if we refresh, we can see we have about in contact. So if we click on contact, obviously it's not going to work because we actually copied over the home controller, which is using the middleware authentication. So I didn't think about that. So let's go into, we don't want it to use the middleware authentication, so we need to create a new controller. So let's go ahead and create a new controller. Let's come over here, and there's a few ways that you can create a new controller. One of those ways is just to duplicate what you have here, or you can use the terminal in order to get into it and use, I can't remember what it's called right now, but there's some functionality you can use to create your controllers with inside of the terminal. So the way we're going to do it in here is the simplest way possible, and we're just going to right click on our controllers folder, add a new page, and we're just going to call this say page controller.php. And then there's a few things that you need in order to create a controller, and you can find that documentation inside of Laravel's documentation, but I'll go ahead and write it out here. So we're going to do PHP, and then we need to do namespace app/http/controllers. So controllers. Okay. So, and basically this is the app HTTP controllers folder structure so that it knows where these controllers reside. And then we're also going to use app HTTP controllers/controller, not user, use, and take that up there. So we need to, and again, this is HTTP controllers. It's the same functionality, and we're going to be using this controller as our primary controller in order to use the functionality from it. So we're inheriting some of that functionality. So down here, we're going to create a class, and this is going to be called pages, or page controller, and then it's going to extends the regular controller. And then that's essentially how we create our new controller. So inside of this, based on our contact here, we're going to change this to page controller, and we need to create a function called contact. So inside of our page controller, we're going to create a new public function. So public function contact, and we're not going to pass anything to it. So now we have this, and what we can do is echo, just for now, we're going to echo contact page, and we're going to save that. Now we should be able to refresh this /contact, and we can see that now we're hitting that controller rather than this home controller that we were trying to hit, because it is using the middleware authentication, which I didn't really consider because we had built that through the terminal, so they put all this together for us. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that because we're not using it. We don't need this either. And now we just need to create a view, and essentially what you can do is, how we are returning a view here, we can also return do the same thing as part of our controller. So instead of doing echo page contact, we can echo or return page contact as a view. And then we just need to go into our views inside of our public folder and create a contact blade. So I'm going to come over here and copy our about blade, create a new file, and we're going to call it contact.blade.php. And then we're going to paste that out, and we don't need any of this stuff. So let's just change this to contact us. Now if we refresh, we now have a contact page and about page with the custom functionality built into it, and we also have this /page. So this is a very simple way to kind of build up these pages within inside of Laravel, and we can use this page controller to create as many different types of pages that we want, and then we can control those by either passing the variables the same way we did over here, or we can control them by just adding the HTML code however it needs to go. So right now, this is kind of the difference between some of the routes that you can do for public facing pages. Is you have your /about, which is going to be displaying this view. It's also going to be returning some array, and then it's a named route. and then you have this about slash variable, which could be slash whatever, and then it's just going to return that variable. And then you have finally slash contact, which is going to be using a controller to pass the variables that are needed for this blade. So let's say for our public view here, if we had a function, we could call that function or that class or whatever it is inside of here, and then grab variables for it to push into our view. So let's say we wanted to grab 3 different variables, and we had a controller or a class or something like that that returned these variables from a database. So just imagine that's actually happening, but we're going to hard code it. So I'm going to set up, we're going to do var1 equals first, and then we're going to do var2 equals second, and then var3 equals third. Now these variables are available to us within this function, so we can return those as part of our public view of this page. So we can do our brackets, and then the first one we're going to name var1, and we're going to pass var1, and then I'm just going to copy this because they're all named the same. And it's essentially the same thing that we did at the beginning of this tutorial. It's just using inside of a controller rather than using inside of the routes itself. And then on our contact blade, we can just come over here and do var1, and if we refresh this page now, we have first. Let's add a break tag in here. I'm just going to copy this and make all 3 of them. So we got 3, then we got 2, so we got first, second, and third. So now these are being passed directly from the controller, which is hard coded again, but you could have a function. Let's say we want to, let's go ahead and create a function. So inside of this page controller, we're going to create a function. It's going to be a public function, and we're going to say random. And then inside of this, we're just going to return a random number from, let's say, 1,000 to 10,000. Okay, so instead of passing it the way we are right now, we can come over here and say that we want to pass this rand, and then that'll grab that variable for us, just whatever is returning from this random number. And let's go ahead and take off the other 2, and then inside of our contact blade, we're going to take that off as well. Now if we refresh, we have a random number that's being generated from another function inside of this function, inside of this controller that's being controlled by the web route. So it kind of gets convoluted, and you can also extend and use other functions and controllers inside of this function. You just have to kind of accentuate your page controller or whatever controller you create to be able to pull from those functions, and then you would just link out to that class as a new class. I don't think I can do it right now because I don't have anything else inside of these. Alright, so let's say we take this function random, and I'm going to take it out of this controller 100%, and then we're going to put it inside of our home controller. Okay, so now our home controller has this random function. So if we try to refresh the page right now, it's going to tell us that this random function does not exist. What we need to do is call the function from that other controller and then use it inside of our new function for this page. Alright, so now that we know that that part's not going to work, we need to come up here and we're going to use another controller. So you would do it the same way. So you do use app http /controllers/ and then we're actually going to pull from our home controller. So we're going to do home controller, and now we have functionality available to us from this. So now we need to get that functionality into this function or inside of this class. So we're going to create a construct for it. So we're going to do public function construct, and then inside of this construct, nope, that's not what I do. Inside of this construct, we're actually going to be passing the variables that we want. So this is the page controller, so we're going to pass page controller as page controller. And then inside of our, so it doesn't wrap, and then inside of this we're going to create, let's come up here and create a private variable or a protected variable. Let's do private. So private, and then we're going to create a variable called rand. So we want to make this rand value equal to the page controller. So page controller. Actually, let's not call this rand because we're going to be using that for the actual function. So we're going to do page, and let's just call it page. Now down here we would set this up as this page rand, and this should give us the same result as the random number that was being generated. No, it does not. This page controller, let's try to do it here. That way we just call this page. Okay, what am I doing wrong here? Okay, I see. I did it backwards. So we're actually on the page controller, so we don't need to name this page controller. We're actually trying to access home controller. So if we change this to home controller, and then we declare the variable as home controller, change it here as well. And let's go ahead and change this to, I don't know, let's change it back to rand because we're calling the function here. And then let's call it rand here. And then finally, this variable is going to equal to rand. Now if we refresh our page, it's working. So now we're calling a function from another controller by using that controller and then passing the variables of that controller as a variable here that we can control or call those functions with inside of that controller. So I know that is a lot to take in. Hopefully I explained it pretty well. We can do this with a lot of different things. Like for example, if you start getting into your administrative dashboard and you want to call certain user functions, so you want to be able to display a first name and a last name, there's a way that you can do that inside of your controllers by gathering those values from the user controller and then passing it to your views. This is just a very simplistic way to do it based off of this other controller being the way that it is. So let me see, I'm trying to think of other things that we can do with the routes before I end this video. Let's see, so we've got a home about, let's go into, outside of the routing a little bit, let's go into the design of this, because obviously this is bugging me because it's so close together. So if we go to our app.blade, we can see all of this stuff. It's just HTML code. So what I want to do is I want to add some padding around these links at the top. So I'm going to modify the CSS for this. Just real quick, it's something that's just bugging me. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to create a new file called style.css inside of our public CSS folder. And then inside of our app folder, we're going to add our CSS here, and I'll get into this a little bit more in a future tutorial, but right now I just really want to do that because it's getting on my nerves. So this is the nav bar, so we're going to do UI nav bar dash nav, and then our li, we're just going to add some padding to the, no, let's not do padding, let's do margin right and just add 1 rem. And now let's refresh this, and there we go. So that's a little bit prettier. It had nothing to do with the routing, it was just getting on my nerves while I was looking at it. So let's add in some, let's add in a subnav here that links to various pages that we can see inside of this route here. So let's go to our app blade, and then inside of this li for the about, we're just going to add in another, and we're going to do ul class subnav, and it's probably not going to look pretty just because we don't have any kind of design for this part yet, but Bootstrap may be able to handle that since I haven't set up anything. And let's do a href, and we can't use a named route here just because the named route doesn't, well, I guess it could technically exist. We're not going to use a named route here because we haven't set it up, so we're just going to do about/test, and then we're going to have the word test in here. Let's go ahead and add another one and another one, and we're going to do about/final. Set this up as the final link, and then this one can be dev drawer, and then we can pass in dev drawer here. So now if we refresh the page, we can click on this now, and it brings us to the pages with the words changing out based on the URL structure, so we know that we're inside of this. Now what we can do differently here, I'm going to just simplify this a little bit, and I just wanted to show you how you could create different links to these new pages that we're creating. But what I want to do is I'm going to have this test link next to it, and instead of just displaying the word test like it currently is, let me close out of some of these pages, and let's close out of the home controller, and let's close out of our yeah, that's fine for now. So inside of this, what we want to do is run a controller. So we're going to create a new controller the same way we did with this one, and instead of returning a function, we are going to return a controller. Let me go ahead and clear that up. Okay, so now if we refresh, it's going to display the contact page because we don't necessarily want it to do that right now, but we're going to display about sub, and we're going to create this function inside of our page controller. So let's do public function about sub, and inside of this we're going to return this public view the same way we were doing it. It's just instead of having the array, we're going to do this var, and then we're going to set it up as to return a var. And right now I'm just going to declare the var as test, just so I can show you that the page actually does still work. About sub, so I named that wrong. About sub expects one parameter to be given a string. Let me see, how do we do this? So we're just doing the var, passing the var here. Okay, well, obviously we don't want to pass it as an array because we're all passing it as an array, but we don't want the var to be an array. It's just from where I copied it at, broke it. So what we want to do is pass the URL that's being given to us here. We want to pass this to this controller, and then have this controller display it instead of having it hard-coded like it currently is. So let's go ahead and do that now. So for the way that we have it set up, it's pretty simple. We could, there's nothing we really need to do over here because this variable is already being passed. So if we come to our page controller and we just add in var, then it'll register that var as what's being passed. So if we come over here and refresh, obviously it's still saying test, but if we do dev drawer, now it's displaying dev drawer. Same thing, final, it's displaying final. So essentially we took our what you want to do here is the least amount of stuff that you can put in here, the better. You want to have your controllers control the majority of it. Let's even take it a step further. So let's say if we wanted to have /var2. Now if we refresh this, if we go to /test, it's not going to work because that page doesn't exist. But if we go to test1, now that page exists, and inside of our controller we would just add another variable here. So we do var2, and then over here we can create another, let's say var2, and have this equal to var2, and then we can pass that, and it'll work if we go to our about, and we're going to copy this. If that variable exists, var2, now it should display test1. So now we have test1, and you can do that for blog style pages and stuff like that. So this is kind of a way to just show you some of the various things that you can do with your routing structure. There's a lot of it that you can do inside of your routes, but I would say the more you can do inside of your controllers, the better, because you have more control over your code and the expected returns whenever you are doing it from one place rather than doing it from here, because over here it's going to get very convoluted very quick. As you can see over here, there's a lot of stuff that's going on into this that really doesn't need to be there, whereas we're doing very similar thing to it, except we're doing it inside of the controller itself. So I think that's going to be it for the routes. There's some other routes I can go over, and I think I'll start getting into that whenever we start creating like a form or something for our contact page. I'll show you how to do a post route, and then we can start getting into some of the other things. But I think for right now, that's going to do it for this tutorial. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you have any comments or concerns, hit it down below and let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. But in the meantime, if you haven't subscribed and you like this video, I got plenty more coming up for Laravel tutorials. Look out for them every Monday. So I guess that's it for now, and I'll talk to you later.